monuments to history and heritage, but they're an attempt to rewrite history and to essentially celebrate a false narrative about what happened during the Civil War, and to send the wink winks, the dog whistles, as we are fond of saying today, across the generations about what the Civil War was about. It's so interesting that we're even having this argument because the people that we memorialize, the nation's forts that are named after Civil War generals, these are all people who fought to perpetuate slavery, which must be an anathema to every American.
Well,
and they're also people responsible for the deaths of these are people responsible for the deaths of loyal American citizens.
Well, they make a play to heritage.
A travesty.
They make a play to heritage that I think is a losing argument with the Confederacy, but when you extend it to the founding fathers, Abraham Lincoln, well, at least not in a memorial as above a black man, Thomas Jefferson, Washington, Grant, is there a danger in going too far, in your opinion?
Of course there's a danger in going too far. It's the passions of the moment. And let's just think about it for a second. Let's just hold off and reserve judgment, Chris, for 1 second, and consider that more than a quarter of the presidents of the United States of America, founded on the idea that all men are created equal, the guy who wrote that owned more than 300 human beings in his lifetime, by the way. More than a quarter of United States presidents owned other human beings. This is a huge thing that we cannot just dismiss. But I would say the Confederate monument, for me, is an easy decision. We have to get rid of them. They're not about heritage. This is a specious argument. This is about the reimposition of white supremacy in the South at various periods. There's nothing about the names of the bases and the forts should be changed. You know, we've taken down the statues. It's a good thing to do. And we now need to continue this reckoning by looking as carefully as we can. Monuments are hugely important. They're acts of fact, but they're also acts of mythology. They're acts of symbols. Your father told me in our film on the Statue of Liberty, symbols are important, but it works both ways in this regard. And so we have to now look at each individual case beyond, I think, the Confederate monuments, and begin to look. Listen, the descendants of Theodore Roosevelt want the statue taken away from the Museum of Natural History. Theodore Roosevelt, who was actually good in many respects on race, invited Booker T. Washington to the White House, took a lot of grief, and then never invited another black person there again, nonetheless has a statue flanked and much lower by a Native American and an African American.
And a black guy on the other side. Absolutely, we all know the statue well.
It looks like white supremacy, and so I'm very happy to see that we are on a case-by-case judgment moving through these questions. The most important thing is the reckoning. The most important thing is for us to not get distracted by the arguments, because the arguments of too far happen on both sides. The issue is that for far too long in our country, citizens of African descent did not enjoy equal justice under the law. They were held as slaves for centuries and still do not have that. This is why in this most extraordinary of American times, the COVID puts us itself as one of the four great crises in American history, with the Civil War, the Depression, and World War II.
And they're hurt much worse by that also.
We are in the midst of this extraordinary reckoning about our racial past, and we have to stop first and listen to those people who have borne the brunt. You and I don't have the facilities to actually receive this information and to be able to transmit it to everyone else. So we have to do a lot of listening, and we have to permit mistakes to be made, and people to overshoot the mark, and rhetoric to be too inflammatory, because for too long people have had a knee at their neck. And these statues, I mean, Robert E. Lee himself said in 1869, after the Civil War, make no monuments to the Confederacy. It will only keep open the sword, the wounds of this thing. They should be
I want to ask you one
obliterated,
quick thing, though, before
consigned to
I let you go,
oblivion.
Ken. There's an aspect of this that's going to be about when the moment of when things were done also, and that'll be part of our retrospective design here. You mentioned my pop earlier. I remember watching one of your earlier efforts on the Civil War. People have looked at that now and said, you know, that series about the Confederacy, a little too glorifying of them, should have said more about the slavery, should have been a harsher indictment. When you look back at that work, do you think about it that way now, differently than you did then?
Yeah, I certainly do. I think in many ways we would probably be making a different kind of film now. But let us remember that the very first chapter was a chapter called All Night Forever, about the realities of slavery. And one of the last moments of the film, the African-American historian Barbara Fields said that the Civil War is still going on. It's still being fought. And regrettably, it can still be lost. This is an interview done in 1988 for a film that appeared in 1990, and it is just as true today. And this is the great lesson of history. History gives us the perspective to make all of their stories evergreen and listen and learn from them. We can't throw everybody out, because if we erase the history, then we don't know where we've been. And if we don't know where we've been, we can't possibly know where we are and where we might be going. This requires study. This moment requires reckoning.